called a halt at Dalton so the men could rest. Nearly everyone believed that the Yankees were right on their heels, but some scouting missions by the cavalry revealed that was not the case. For whatever reason, the Federals had held back, so Bragg stayed at Dalton, waiting to see what was going to happen next. What happened was that he was replaced as the commander of the Army of Tennessee. Johnston assumed the command, and he immediately set out to get his army ready for a renewed assault by the Yankees. It was inconceivable that, having won Tennessee, the Northerners would stop now. To the south lay Atlanta, a rail and supply center that would surely be an irresistibly tempting target for the Federals. Johnston began by reorganizing the army into 3 corps: 2 infantry corps under Generals William J. Hardee and John Bell Hood, and a cavalry corps commanded by General Joseph Wheeler. Reorganizing a defeated army was one thing. Raising its spirits was something entirely different. Johnston succeeded at the former and struggled with the latter. But although few were ready to give up, the tens of thousands of men who were arrayed atop Rocky Face knew that the odds were against them. The Yankees, it was said, had 100,000 men in Chattanooga now, and they were led by the fierce General William Tecumseh Sherman. Ulysses S. Grant, who had won the victory at Chattanooga with Sherman's help, had gone to Washington to assume overall command of the Union forces and bedevil General Robert E. Lee in Virginia. Grant would find wily old Marse Robert a tougher nut to crack than Bragg had been, the Confederate soldiers told themselves. In the meantime, the Southerners would have to deal sooner or later with Sherman, so they kept a close eye on the valley west of Rocky Face. That was the way Sherman would come at them. Back in February, there had been a minor battle in this spot, as the Federals sent a small force against the ridge to probe the Confederate line, then pull back. Since then, there had been only occasional sniping. Cory used the sleeve of his shirt to wipe sweat from his forehead. Only a week into May, and already the weather was hot. Still, many of the men were glad summer was on the horizon. The winter had been wet, cold, and miserable. Threadbare blankets and ragged uniforms provided little protection against the chill. Many of the men no longer had shoes or boots, and had to wrap rags around their feet in an attempt to keep their toes from freezing off. Cory was lucky in that respect. His shoes had a few small holes in them, but they were intact for the most part. At least he had shoes. That was more than most could say, including Abner Strayhorn, who stretched out his legs in front of him and wiggled his toes in the sunlight. "Well, that feels good," Abner said, around a mouthful of hardtack. "I remember when I was a boy running barefoot through the grass and soaking my feet in the creek. I never did like shoes much." "You'll wish we had some when we go to marching again," Cory said. Abner laughed. "Yeah, more than likely. But I don't reckon we'll be pulling out of here any time soon. Old General, he likes to sit, so we sit. Make the damn Yankees come to us." That would happen, Cory thought, and probably sooner rather than later. Even now it was easy to gaze off to the north and west from the heights of Rocky Face and imagine a haze of dust floating in the air, dust raised by wagon wheels, and the hooves of the mules and horses pulling those vehicles, and the feet of tens of thousands of blue-clad Yankee soldiers. Only he was not imagining it. Cory realized as he sat up straighter and reached for his rifle lying on the rocky ground beside him. There really was a lot of dust over there, and that much dust could mean only one thing. "They're coming," he said. Abner wasn't paying any attention. He and Cory had been friends for several months, and Cory knew that the lanky Tennessean had a tendency to drift off into a world of his own, even when he was on guard duty and was supposed to be watching for the enemy. "Yankees," Cory said, louder this time. "Huh? What are you saying, Cory?" Leveling his arm and pointing, Cory said, "Look over there. The Yankees are coming." Strayhorn's eyes widened in surprise as he looked where Cory was indicating. "Some bitch! There's so much dust there must be a whole blamed army over there." Yes, the Union Army, Cory thought, but he didn't say that. There was no point in making Abner feel foolish. Picking up his rifle, Cory scrambled to his feet. He brushed rock dust off the seat of his trousers. "I'll go tell the lieutenant. He may know about it already." Abner nodded. "I'll stay right here and keep an eye on those old boys. Y'all heard back, Cory?" The two of them were posted atop a sheer cliff, known as Buzzard's Roost, that overlooked Mill Creek Gap, through which the railroad tracks ran. Confederate engineers had constructed dams to block the flow of the creek and flood much of the gap. The area that was left open was guarded by earthworks and overlooked by dozens of artillery batteries and a strong force on top of the flanking heights. Large boulders littered the ridge and provided good cover. If the Yankee infantry came, the Gap's defenders would have plenty of shelter and a good place from which to fire back at the northern invaders. If the Federals targeted the batteries on the Gap instead, well then the rocks wouldn't help the men above. The exploding shells would blow them to hell. As he hurried across the broad, fairly level top of the ridge, Cory hoped that the Yankees sent the infantry first. He wanted to have a fighting chance. That was all the Confederacy had ever asked, he thought. Lieutenant Edward Stockard was in charge of the detail manning Buzzard's Roost. He was in his mid-20s, not much older than Cory, but in this war, which had cost the lives of so many gallant soldiers, some men in their 20s were colonels, or even generals. Stockard stood at the eastern crest of the ridge, balancing himself precariously on top of a boulder and squinting through a spyglass. He lowered the glass and looked down at Cory. "I see him, Private Brannon," he said before Cory could speak. With a curt motion, he closed the spyglass into a short tube. "We knew the Yankees would come visiting sooner or later." "Yes, sir," Cory said. "What do you want us to do, Lieutenant?" Stockard smiled. "Give our guests a warm welcome, Mr. Brannon. A most warm welcome." Cory nodded and turned to hurry back to the other side of the ridge. Stockard's response was just about what he had expected. It still sounded odd sometimes, though, to hear somebody address him as Private Brannon. Cory had fought at Forts Henry and Donelson and at the little country church near Pittsburgh Landing, known as Shiloh. Had raided into western Tennessee with the cavalry under the incomparable Nathan Bedford Forrest. Had slipped into Memphis on a desperate, dangerous mission as a spy, and had taken part in the valiant but doomed defense of Vicksburg. But he had done those things as a civilian, not a real soldier. Not until the previous autumn had he sworn the oath and joined the Confederate Army. A part of him still wished he hadn't. Then he would be free to go where he pleased, to pick his own fights. After the battle along Chickamauga Creek, he could have gone west with Forrest, who had befriended him what seemed a lifetime ago at Shiloh. The general was back in Tennessee now, Cory had heard, raising hell with the Yankee supply lines. But even as those thoughts went through his head, Cory knew he couldn't have left, whether or not he was in the Army officially. Colonel Charles Thompson, one of his best friends and the uncle of Cory's beloved wife, Lucille, had been wounded at Chickamauga. Cory couldn't have ridden off and left him in the field hospital. Not that his staying behind with Bragg's army had done any good, he mused bitterly. The colonel had succumbed to his wounds anyway, dying as he and Cory stood, looking over the hills of southeastern Tennessee. There had been no way to get word of Thompson's death to his wife, Mildred. She and Lucille had fled from Yankee-occupied Vicksburg, heading west across Louisiana toward Texas. The understanding was that Cory and the colonel would join them when they could. But with tens of thousands of Yankees in their way, Cory and Thompson had been forced to go the other direction, to Chattanooga. Then had come the battles, the colonel's death, and the retreat to Dalton. Cory didn't even know if Lucille was still alive. It was that simple and that awful. Abner crouched behind one of the boulders and poked the barrel of his rifle toward the oncoming Federals. "What'd the lieutenant say?" he asked as Cory came back to join him. "To give them a warm welcome." Abner spat. "We'll give 'em hell, that's what we'll give 'em." Cory knelt beside his friend and nodded. He peered across the valley to the west of the ridge. The landscape was thickly wooded, like all the other valleys and ridges in this part of Georgia. But through gaps in the trees he could see movement. From time to time his keen eyes even caught flashes of blue. There was no doubt now. All along the crest of the ridge, men crowded forward, eager to catch a glimpse of the approaching